We should not be surprised if we have a challenging situation in a high risk or a critical risk market. Right?
This video shows a keynote presentation of Claes Lindgren, Global Category Area Manager Logistics Services Supply at Inter IKEA Group. He will present how IKEA is building a resilient supply chain in the new reality. You will learn how real-life end-to-end scenarios help, how to react in a crisis, proactive and faster, how to improve the planning across the value chain, how to run scenarios, and how to use facts.
I was asked to talk a little bit about resilience in the supply chain, which is difficult for many. For us, it's particularly difficult because we are operating in many markets in the world and have a lot of sending, receiving relations. So it's challenging. Work for an organization called IKEA Supply, based in Switzerland, and we have a lot of offices around the world. I think most of you know IKEA. It's a relatively, we're in 63 markets, soon to come 64, I'll share soon. The vision we have is to create a better everyday life for the many people, right? That means the many people in the world, the many people in Asia, the many people in South America, and so on, right? So we try really to have a global outlook and a global footprint to reach the many people. Of course, many people are in Europe, but the many people in the world live in Asia today, and that's where we want to meet the many people. So, IKEA numbers.
Claes already mentioned IKEA has 495 stores in 63 markets. Soon will be 64. The first IKEA store was opened in 1958 in Elmhult. The latest store was opened in United Arab Emirates. Germany is still the most important market, and the biggest IKEA store is in Pasay City in Philippines. Impressive of IKEA is also the huge number of shipments and the variety of suppliers and products. So the supply chain is very complex.
We find ourselves in a new reality, and I had to listen to the four guys before the break, and I can subscribe to a lot of what they said and their reflections on what you said, Sebastian. The reality is indeed very different for us today. The customer behavior is very different. You may be familiar with a product in our range called the Billy bookcase. We sell, and we have been on a sales trend to sell a Billy bookcase every 5 seconds around the clock, around the world, somewhere in the world, right? That was easier 5 years ago when a plannable supply chain, when we had a cash and carry retail footprint, and so on. Today we have, as most retailers, we have an omnichannel footprint, right? You can choose whenever, wherever is the idea. And that of course puts a lot of pressure on us as a retailer, right? So if you want to distribute and sell a Billy bookcase every 5 seconds around the world, it takes a lot from a planning and also from how you build resilience as a retailer, right? So that's testing us. And then of course we talked before the break, listened to the gentleman talking about geopolitical and geo-economical challenges, and of course environmental impact on the business. We are impacted by all those, as most of you are. The environment is proving to become a more and more challenging area, with flooding in certain areas of Europe even. We know challenges that we have in Asia and other parts of the world, but this is becoming a bit of a new reality for us that we are having to prepare for. That of course also puts our supply chain resilience at risk. Because of course, like was mentioned before the break, the expectation is for the supply chain to work and deliver. There's very little tolerance and acceptance when to have deviations and not to have the goods when the customer wants them. So then the question was and is, how do we then tackle these challenges at IKEA, right? Again, I started by saying we're looking for the answers when it comes to end-to-end.
Claes give them a very interesting exercise they did at IKEA.
So that gave us then a lot of good indications when it came to resilience and how can we build a better resilience from a paper exercise to an exercise in reality. Yeah? So when we talk then about resilience, we say that we build resilience by being responsive, right? Because if we start here, responsiveness is about preparing, right? That's to understand, to act on disruptions, volatilities and opportunities. And of course, there are many of those today, from trade conflicts to trade barriers, and I mean, we have just gone a few years ago exited a global pandemic and so on. But it's a matter of creating responsiveness in order then to create resilience in the supply chain. Because again, the retailers that we serve, the 495 stores, and soon to be 64 markets, are of course interested in knowing, they don't necessarily want to know about the action plans that we have that will work in 4 weeks, 6 weeks or 8 weeks. They want to know when is the delivery coming in order for me to close my gap on a potential safety stock, right? So that's our responsibility as a supply organization towards the retailers, right? And again, you overlay that with a global sourcing footprint and a global retail footprint, and it gets very, very challenging. But again, our choice, we choose to look at it starting with responsiveness, creating resilience, and that's our objective then, to create the right range at the right time and cost to our customers, right? Because we want to maintain an equally good availability in Turkey or Budapest or in Germany, right? That's our responsibility and how we set up the global supply chain. So very much about a responsiveness to become resilient. And that's also what I think the test gave us a good confirmation and good validation on how that's working. What did we learn then as a part of this test? That we need to become better in planning, right? From sales to demand to supply planning to need planning, right? In order to execute the flows. Because again, if we take the reality that we have today compared to, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago, it's very, very different, right? 5 or 10 years ago, it was relatively easy to understand how much a store here in Budapest would sell on a Tuesday, right? On what article, what mix, what range. Again, today with us being also an omnichannel retailer, it's much more difficult. And of course, the customer drives those decisions, right? So that has led us to conclude that we need a much better planning landscape, likely a completely different way to plan the business. So we are on to that as we speak, with a larger initiative to change the planning concept, if you will, in IKEA, from sales to demand to supply to need planning. And then of course, we need to set the requirements for a more resilient supply chain, right? We, in order to be coming from in a crisis, from reacting to a crisis to having a proactive plan, right? And that's also, this exercise we did also led us down a path showing that there are big opportunities. And we don't need, I concur with the previous speakers when they said, I don't believe we need an AI model to do that. An AI model can support us to say, in a decision making. But we need a good understanding of an operational execution plan. It's telling us where we should go and what we need to act on. And that's where I think it's important, whether we do the planning in Excel or in other tools, it's very, very important that we have a plan, a tangible plan that we can act on, right? What are then the requirements for efficient planning? It's basically to improve the way to plan, to ensure that we have the customers there when the customers want them. And that is, again, if we go to what we call the customer meeting landscape today, from having many big stores to a lot of the future that we believe in IKEA is very much that we come to retail areas in cities where the many people live and work with a smaller footprint, right? With a different range size and a different frame. And that's of course very, very important that we can plan for that. Because we may not have a full range, we may have a limited range, we may have a smaller range. And how do we then plan for that? So that's one of the areas that we need to change today, because we are very much we're used to and very, very successful in the cash and carry space, right? Knowing how when a customer comes, as you go upstairs in IKEA, go to the showroom, hopefully go to the restaurant, you go downstairs, and basically it's a cash and carry retailer. But today, of course, going to an inner city location anywhere in the world, the customer behavior is completely different, and we need to have a different model to plan now. So, and then if we say that paired with the two major areas then, better planning and then building more resilience. And building more resilience, same thing as having end-to-end visibility, is easier said than done. Because of course it comes with cost, it comes with an organizational readiness, but we said, we concluded we need to do that in this new environment we operate in. So then we spoke, the guys spoke this morning about time, right? We need to speed up, right? We need to have shorter decision cycles, shorter. We cannot, when the crisis hits, we cannot sit and look at different reports and have unclarities in roles and responsibilities. So the three areas that we have agreed and said that are likely key for us to not become, to have all the answers, but at least have more answers than we do today, are three then. It's time to awareness, time to response, and time to capacity. And it's creating, the first one is very basic to say, the awareness around what's the magnitude of the problem, right? Again, hypothetically, if we lose one big market, right? Do we even have a potential with an alternative sourcing setup, or do we have transport in place, or distribution capacity in place to fix it? That's of course the first question you need to answer. And then within that, if we've answered that question, then we need to say, what's the time to respond to the challenge, right? If we need to take goods out of a different market and so on. And then time to capacity is very easy, right? It's about shrinking the time. It cannot take 30 days to have a new transport land relation in place from country A to B. It must be much, much faster, right? So that's of course up for us when we have the partners we work with, and if we have a single nomination, a multi-nomination and so on, to ensure that we can answer up to that, right? So those are the three areas that we have identified that we believe are very, very important. But if we then take the awareness action, right? There's of course an internal point of view on that, where we as IKEA, we can steer and drive some things, and then there's an external dimension as well. If we take then the internal is pointing down and the external is pointing up. If we start with lower one first, we very much actively work with classification of markets, right? All the markets we operate in. When we say what is the level of supply chain vulnerability, it goes from low to medium to high to critical, right? And there are different decisions connected to each one of those, right? If we are in a critical market for some reason, and that's classified, we know that there's a fairly high level of risk, and then we need a scenario on that. If we are a low-level risk country where we source and operate in, we know that the chances are very, very low that we will have a complete supply interruption in that market. And then we have a different approach, right? But what we have tried to do then is to say, let's focus on if we have markets that are high or critical from an approach, right? And what do we do to mitigate and address those, right? So those are internal decisions that we can take. Then, of course, the external focus that we have, anything from geopolitical to supply chain, environment, and social and governance. It's the previous speaker spoke a lot about the tariffs. Of course, we are working in an environment that's very unknown today, and how we lead through that. But of course, we are also taking decisions in order to be where we look at how can we regionalize sourcing, how can we regionalize operations as much as we can, so we have a closer supply base to big retail markets, right? So that's something we're looking at. And of course, understanding where, also having worked with suppliers for many, many, many years, like 20, 30 years, we are also looking at them, how are they moving along with the markets, and how do we move together with them, right? Because of course, the supply base is shifting partly in the world today due to some of the geopolitical and constraints that we have. But that's also very important that we understand. Nobody can, I think, preempt and guess what will happen next. But at least we can. We have learned a couple of things now through having been through a global pandemic. We have learned, of course, that changes in political situation can lead to things that are very much impacting us as a business. So those are external factors then that we looked at. But of course, the ones that we can steer and impact beside ourselves, we are very much in the lead on, right? So that's also something we discuss and decide on when it comes to time to awareness, right? Our reflection is we should not be surprised if we have a challenging situation in a high risk or a critical risk market, right? And then it's up to us in order to create the awareness and mitigation plans for that supply chain. So then understanding our vulnerabilities as a supply chain, right? We have, there are many, right? I don't know how many, if anyone of you both based in Poland, Czech region, Austria, some more, I don't know. We had, was it the summer before last, of course, a very, very difficult time with flooding in those markets, as you know. This was, for us, a very new situation. We have a very big supplier base in that area. We have a big flow, east, west, west, east in Europe. And of course, it becomes very difficult then. How do you manage the business then? From how do you focus on the people, the organization, our supply capacities there, but also on the transport capacities, right? And this is something that of course seems to be the new normal now, when we have a climate crisis that is driving some of these, pushing some of these. And this is something we need to be ready for and to be able to preempt in the future. But I think it's for us to be able to be aware and then have a readiness plan for that as well. But of course, it also drives some of the decisions we have as a company around what are critical corridors, what are critical routes, but those are things that have taught us a lot and which we will likely be faced with in the future as well, as many of you will as well. So then type to response. It's a relatively easy picture, because if we say, like most retailers or most companies, we of course have a range offer. Again, many of you and many other retailers have a much broader range offer than we do in SKUs, right? But we have, of course, like most retailers and most companies, we have a range offer that we know is important for the customers and consumers, and that we know is of course driving turnover and volume, right? So it's a matter of classifying that range offer to ensure that we have a strong availability and strong supply of those. For example, I mentioned Billy. Another strong range for us that's an absolute must in a store is packs. We sell incredible numbers of packs throughout Europe and the world, and that's one area. We cannot be without packs in store today. It cannot happen. We must be able to ensure that we have packs and we have complement, which is a range area that supports that. So that, of course, puts us in a situation where we then need to have a response plan for packs. That's maybe different than what it is for another area of the range, because packs is so important for the retailers and for the customers, right? Because packs is a planned purchase. It's not a spontaneous purchase that you go and pick up a pack solution today. You plan to go to a store on Friday to plan an order and have a packs delivered. And of course, then the customer is not particularly happy if we don't have an availability on stock of packs. So that's one area that we are working hard on to really identify and to create a good response plan in. So we have from different suppliers that we have a response plan for packs. Yeah. Then we have agreed on some supply chain principles as well. We have 7 of those. I'm not at the liberty to share those, but you can guess what those are, right? Around when it comes to, we classify our range in again, service level, where we say the service level 1 is of course more important than service level 4 and so on. But where we have a different focus, again, from a manufacturing, from a production side, transport and distribution side, to ensure that we have a different approach to it when it comes to service level 1 article than a service level 4. Then, again, scenario planning and backup plans have done something on the key, if we take the packs relation, where we have a dual sourcing or more. We have multiple supply relations. And we also try to have a dual nomination on all the transport capacities for those key capacities. So we are not surprised if in case we lose the transport capacity for one reason, we have immediate backup plan, right? So that's the importance on, let's say, packs and others, that we have to ensure that we cannot be surprised if we need to ensure that the retailers can get service on packs, right? So that's what we have been doing now. Then it's a matter of prioritizing, right? Which is very challenging in a big company. Because the purchasing organization may have a different point of view than the supply organization and the retail organization. What's important, right? But then we need to, of course, meet up as a total IKEA ecosystem, also with the retailers, to say, you know what, in case we need to prioritize, our wish would be that we can do this. Do you agree to that? And what we have learned as well, in many cases, we are very close to the retail organization in IKEA, the many franchisees, right? But we have clearly a gap sometimes in the way we prioritize what we deem be important and what the retailer deems be important. So it's very important that we have those discussions saying, you know what, in case we would need to prioritize on this relation with these supplier capacities, what should we prioritize and why? And then help basically come to that conclusion together. Because likely if we, a supplier, prioritize that, it's very likely that the retailer would not agree to it, right? So it's better that we meet them and they share with us what they want. And then time to capacity, we choose to call this time to the new normal, right? I think we were maybe comfortable with having a backup solution in place after a number of days, weeks even, right? And saying, just explaining to the retailers and consumers and customers that we're no longer so comfortable with that. We know that we are being measured on this, and we know that we need to have a different approach, right? And this time to capacity is much shorter today, where we need to have a different approach on critical relations, right? So it's shortened a lot, and the expectation on us has accordingly, right? So if you take that, then what used to be okay, where we said we need to have an alternative solution in place, because of course we have at various points in the chain, at the retail stores, the distribution centers, suppliers, a safety stock calculation, right? But of course, we don't want to run the risk of that safety stock becoming a bottleneck and impacting sales. So of course, we want to ensure that the reaction time is within the area of safety stock, so we don't impact, of course, potential sales losses.
Claes then pointed out the importance to measure and to monitor, and showed some of their measures.
Resilience and response measures. And this is a summary. I would encourage you, run a real-life end-to-end scenario in your supply chain. Test that, you will get many, many interesting findings. Instead of going from reacting in a crisis, be proactive. Look at plans to go across your supply chain. Run scenarios and adjust and improve. And then use facts for this. If your fact base is Excel, use that. But use one fact. Don't start discussing what the fact base is. And then what we've learned, I know you're a sailor, Sebastian, as well.
Yes, thank you very much.
So the strongest storms make the best sailors. So. That's it from IKEA.
Claes had an important business meeting afterwards, so there was no time for discussion. But there's always time to say thank you, or as I said, tack, which means thank you in Swedish. Thank you very much, Claes Lindgren, for this inspiring presentation. And of course, thank you very much for IKEA for making the world, at least for myself, a bit better.